Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you can hear me. We're going to go ahead and get started today. I've got a few people in the waiting room. Let me let them in. All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to Wild at Work. My name is Megan Pineda. I'm the Adult Education Specialist with Texas Wildlife Association. Joining us today is Dylan Castro. Dylan is the founder and head beekeeper at Keeper's Harvest in San Marcos. We welcome Dylan to join us today at Wild at Work. Before I hand the reins over to you, Dylan, I'd like to remind our audience to please keep your microphones muted throughout the presentation today. If you'd like to ask a question, please put your question in the chat. We'll do our best to answer it at the end of the presentation. Dylan, I'll go ahead and let you share your screen and give us a brief background on yourself and let you begin.
Okay, unmute. I hope can you hear me? Okay, excellent. Thank you, Megan, for having me here, having me back. I remember doing the Women of the Land event with you guys. So there's if anyone was there, there's a little quiz at the end of this. And if you participated in that, then maybe you can't. I don't know. It's okay. But anyways, you'll get a free jar at the end, and we'll get your information somehow, an address or a phone number, and I can deliver it to you. But at any rate, I have a presentation here, Central Texas Beekeeping 101. I hope you can see my screen okay. Let's jump into it. Let's see here. So, just a little bit about me. I have just shy of a decade's worth of experience. I started in 2017. I was working with my stepdad in his commercial beekeeping operation. He's a very large commercial beekeeper, runs about 20,000 colonies all across the United States, California, Washington, Kansas, Florida, North Dakota, doing different pollination contracts and honey production. Honey production is in North Dakota mainly, some done in Florida. I currently manage 250 colonies throughout the Hayes, Travis, Burnett, Bastrop, and Comal counties, hoping to get to about 500 next year. It's quite a bit of colonies to manage as a single operator here, but I think we can make it happen. Okay, so first slide and aspect we're going to jump into is the honeybee life cycle and hierarchical roles within the hive. So there's three main roles within, or three, hierarchical roles within the hive. And then when we start to talk about the worker bees, there's like three sub hierarchies within that. But some main takeaways here from this chart is, our queen bees take 16 days to emerge after the egg has been chosen to essentially become the new queen. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. Worker bees take 21 days to emerge from the egg to larva to pupa stage. Drone bees, which are males, they take about 24 days to emerge. All honeybees start as eggs that hatch into larvae and grow into pupa. What determines the sex and type of bee depends on the fertility of the eggs laid and the diet the eventual larvae are fed. So the queen can actually choose whether or not the egg that she lays is fertile or is infertile. Infertile eggs are always male bees or drones, and she can, just by passing the eggs through her reproductive tract, choose whether or not the eggs will be fertile or not. So that's really, really interesting aspect about the queens in specific. On this slide, we have the different types of brood or the pupa stages that the bees are in. So on the left side, we have the queen cell, and the bees have to draw out the queen's cell to grow. She's anywhere from 1.5 to 2 times larger than your regular worker bee, and it's kind of got this peanut-shaped protrusion outside of the comb. Even when she hatches, she's about 1.5 times larger, but once she goes and mates, she can be up to 2 times larger. I guess you could say 2.5 times, but just they're much larger than the worker bees. The queen is strictly fed a diet of royal jelly for her entire pupation stage, even as a larva. We still don't know how the bees go about choosing which egg is going to be the next queen. Sometimes they choose one, sometimes they choose 10. I've seen 20 queen cells in a hive before. Pretty interesting sight there. Worker brood is much more uniform to the wax or to the comb that they're laid in. Uh, Once it's capped over with wax, it's pretty symmetrical and flat to the comb. The brood will tend to be very yellow, as you see in that picture on freshly made wax, and on a slightly more used frame, it's more of like a rust orange. As the bees travel across and brood is laid in there and more cycles have been laid, the comb tends to discolor. And then on the right side, we have drone brood. So that you can see is much more, it's protruded out, not as much as the queen cell, but it's very bulging out, and it's an ideal place for varroa mites to reside. The drone brood is just, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of royal jelly. There's the pupas are much larger. It's just their ideal choice of reproduction. And so actually what you see there, this green frame, that's actually part of different beekeepers integrated pest management. You can actually install these in the hive. The bees will lay, or the queen will lay infertile eggs in their rear drone brood, but before the drones hatch, beekeepers actually will pull those out, freeze them, and it's a way to kill off mites in there. And then fun fact, if you have chickens, you can feed that to your chickens, and it's a really high protein source. um, can be a sign of a hive getting ready to swarm. Also, the queen will only lay infertile eggs or drone brood during the swarm season because, instinctually the hives want to split or swarm. And so, in order to do so, a new queen has to be laid, which means there has to be drones there to mate with the new queen. So, you only see that around those times. Here's the queen bee. After emergence, the queen is a virgin and must mate with 12 to 20 drones to ensure proper fertilization. And this is achieved by multiple mating flights. The queen is solely the reproductive organism of the hive. A lot of people think that she's the quote unquote shot caller, but she's purely in charge of just rearing more bees and increasing the population. She can lay about 2,000 eggs per day in the peak season, which is spring. So March to about late May. After May, and you get the honey flow on, the swarming instinct tends to go down. But if the hive is congested too much, they can still definitely swarm. Like I said, she can choose whether to lay fertile or infertile eggs. And there are many different types of queen bee, honeybee species. This is one of the really fascinating things about queens in general, or just bees, that there's just so many different genetics. From left to right, we have the carniolans. It's a darker honeybee. Each queen has kind of a different trait or characteristic to them. Carniolans tend to be more temperature resistant. They're very good honey producers, but they will tell you what is going on in nature. If there is a dearth or a lack of nectar or pollen coming in, she will significantly shrink the nest down. So, in the last slides, the brood frames can be corner to corner, but when there's no resources coming in, she will shrink that down to about a baseball or softball size. Carniolan Italian hybrids are what we run in our operation because we need the bees to have a sufficient amount of bees within the colony to get through winter time. So the Italians are really good for that. They're really uh, their trait is like they rear a lot of population, and they're the most like swarm. Uh, they will want to swarm more in the springtime more than anything because they will have more bees in the hive compared to carniolans, at any given time, whether it's March or April. We have an Italian hybrid there, which kind of to me looks like a buckfast. Like I said, there's so many different kinds: buckfast, Italian, Cordovan. There's even a Texas, I think it's 5,000 or 500 queen. And then you have the Italian Carniolan hybrid. These are all queen pictures of queens that are in our outfit. Uh, right now, we have more Italian Carniolans on the right side than anything. Moving on, the worker bee. From birth to death, the workers serve three main roles within the colony, and this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, where you have like that sub hierarchy. So when the honeybees first hatch, they essentially are infants. They need about a week, some people say 2 weeks to mature. They are super fuzzy little creatures when they come out. But their first role is nurse bee. And so that is essentially the job of taking care of the next generation or the next cycle of bees that are going to hatch. The nurse bees and freshly hatched bees produce the most royal jelly from their hypopharyngeal glands. And so they are in charge of feeding the larvae that are going to hatch in the next 21 days. After that next cycle hatches, they mature into what we would call our house bees, and even within that, you have kind of a different set of roles. You have an undertaker bee; they're in charge of removing any dead bees from the colony. Honeybees are very clean creatures, believe it or not. They like to keep their hives very clean. There's even natural hydrogen peroxide that's produced within the hive. They also are in charge of making wax, cleaning debris out, things of that sort. And then after that, the next role is the worker or the bees that go and collect nectar and pollen and things like that. And depending on the time of year, worker bees can live anywhere from 45 days to 3 months. 45 days are your spring and summer bees. The 3 months are your winter bees. They're actually like physiologically different. They have more fat stores in their bellies to get them through wintertime in the event that there's a lack of resource or lack of honey and pollen and things in the hive to keep them going. Um, Worker bees are responsible for all things colony related. Supersedure of queen, which is whether the queen is getting old or she has a broken leg or she's becoming infertile. They're in charge of creating the releasing pheromones within the hive that's saying, hey, we need to make a new queen. Ours is falling in a sense. They're in charge of the swarming instinct and the collection of resources. Genetics can elicit certain behavior traits. So, kind of what we were talking about with the queens, there are some bees who are very Varroa resistant. There's like a VSH queen, and they will actually uncap pupa that they can sense has larvae infested in it and remove those pupa to clean the hive out. And really quickly, too, if there's any questions, you can put them in the chat. Um, I should have said that before, but I will get to those either after or as we go, depending on the questions. Um, Now we're here at the drone bee, this very crazy beady-eyed looking bee. Drones have no stingers. Then they serve one role only, and that is to mate with the new virgin queen that comes about in the swarming swarming months. The queens will begin laying drone brood during the springtime when swarming is of the essence. And worker bees will typically kill or kick out drone bees once the summer has arrived or the winter because they literally do nothing. They don't collect. Their only job is to mate with the queen. Other than that, they will eat resources, and so the workers need to kick them out or kill them because if they go into wintertime with drones, they will chow down on all the resources. And so literally not much else going on here. They're just there to mate with the queen. Very important role they serve, but there's only one role. So moving on here. Now we're into the pollination power of honeybees. A lot of this is very fascinating. There's some uh, like kind of fiscal notes in here about agriculture pollination and things like that. Honeybees pollinate roughly 35% of US crops worth over $15 billion annually. It's about one third of everything we eat or that is on our plate, given you have fruits and vegetables in your diet, which is probably a wise thing for all of us. One forager will visit 50 to 100 flowers per minute, and a single hive can service 300 million flowers per day. So that's a lot of things going on. I mean, they literally will work themselves to death. They need to bring in a lot of resources to keep the hive going, to keep enough resources there within the hive to feed brood and the larva. That left picture is a beautiful representation of the springtime and the different diverse pollens that they bring in. It's very important for bees. If they bring in one single pollen, it's not the best. It's like if we ate a pea protein for our entire lives, we'd probably have some gut issues. Same thing with the bees. Crop examples that the bees pollinate are almonds, melons, strawberries, pears, apples, kiwis, many native wildflowers. There's so many different crops too that they pollinate that I didn't list, like pumpkins, blueberries, raspberries, just so many different things. And the almonds, it's actually the largest migratory movement of honeybees in the entire world is when commercial beekeepers will send their bees to California for the almond pollination every year. It's the largest movement of honeybees in the entire world. Very fascinating. Some central Texas wildflowers and plants that bees love: rain lilies, lemon bee balm. Bees make a really, really yummy honey off of lemon bee balm, or horse mint is another name for it. You have Indian blanket, Indian paintbrush, prickly pear, antelope milkweed. They also make a really, really good honey if you have a strong enough colony. It's like frosted flakes is what it tastes like. It's really, really good. Moving on, this is now probably my favorite aspect of the bees is how they make honey. There's a lot of interesting facts in there. It takes 4,000 bees visiting 2 million flowers to make 1 pound of honey. It's quite the effort there just to make 1 pound. Foraging and collecting nectar. When the bees bring nectar in or collect it, it's 70 to 80% water and sugars. It's sucrose. So the bees have to bring the nectar into the hive. They regurgitate it to 3 to 4 other bees from their honey gut. They have a separate honey or a separate gut entirely that they store the nectar in as they're collecting. It doesn't get stored in their consumption gut and then regurgitated in that way. It's I guess, in a way, a very clean regurgitation. There's an enzymatic conversion within the honey stomach. Invertase is a live enzyme that they put into the honey, or that's in their honey gut, and it breaks down the sucrose, the very complex sugars, into glucose and fructose, things that we can consume. There's other live enzymes present in genuine raw honey, cannot be heated. It's diastase and glucose oxidase. Glucose oxidase is a very, very, very interesting enzyme that's in honey. It's only present when they're dehumidifying the hive and pulling the moisture out of the nectar that's stored in the combs. So if they were to just store the nectar in the combs and leave it as is, it would ferment. So they have to pull the moisture out of the nectar that's there to bring it down to about 16 to 18% moisture content. And then from there, they cap it over, which is that picture you see on the left. There's a wax coating that covers the honey. But going back to the glucose oxidase enzyme, is when they're dehumidifying the hive, glucose oxidase produces gluconic acid, which produces hydrogen peroxide. But when the bees have dehumidified the hive or pulled the moisture out of the nectar to that 16 to 18%, it ceases to exist. But as you've heard, putting raw honey on wounds is really good for that. When the honey hits the salinity of your skin, it recreates the gluconic acid production, which recreates the hydrogen peroxide. So it's a natural hydrogen peroxide production, holistic way to heal wounds. I've done it before. I do it all the time, and it is spot on there. Um, oh, okay, yeah, that's it. Okay, so in the chat, you can put your answer here. How much honey will one bee make in her entire lifetime? And I think it's much less than one might think. We'll wait for those answers because that's the end of the slide, or the presentation. So thank you guys for having me here. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. We have one question here. How do commercial beekeepers send their bees to California? FedEx BX. uh, Essentially, no, not FedEx or anything like that. We put them on semis, so 48-foot semis or 53-foot semis, depending. Load them up. Commercial beekeepers run their hives on pallets, and there's 4 hives to a pallet. Then we stack them, and in each stack there's 12 hives, 3 pallets high. And yeah, and then it's just semi-load after semi-load. So, like for example, my stepdad, he runs 20,000 hives. It's about 48 semi-load, 45, 48 semi-loads, give or take, of bees that he loads up every year to send to whatever location. We have some answers there. Got a tablespoon, a teaspoon, 1 cup. So those are incorrect. The closest one would be a teaspoon, um, but much, much less than that, even in her entire lifetime. Maybe wait for a couple more here, and then I'll give you guys the answer.
While we're waiting on those potential answers, I have a question regarding, and it's something that alludes to our conversation prior to the meeting starting, was ag exemption and how beekeeping can essentially assist landowners with obtaining an ag exemption. In case anybody here is a landowner looking to, achieve that tax valuation, but don't, no interest in running cattle and things like that. How can beekeeping help them do that? Can you give us a little bit of a, you don't have to go really in depth, but just give us the overview of how that works.
Sure. Yeah. So with ag exemption with bees, you have to ag exemption in general, you have to have 5 acres or more. Bees cap out at 20 acres or 16 hives. Different counties call for different degrees of intensity, which is how many hives you need per acre. But yeah, essentially, if you have land and you want it to get ag exempt, we lease our hives out to you, and we do everything. So we do all of the hive maintenance. They're essentially under the same regimen as our own bees that we run for, say, honey production. We keep all the county documentation that they would request at that fifth year. It does take 5 years to build history um, in order to obtain the ag exemption. But whether you own land for it just an investment, you're putting it into a trust, it's your forever home. You, like I said, plan on passing it down. It is worth every single penny to do that because in the long run, I mean, in the short run, it's an investment into our company to come out and manage the hives and keep all the documentation, but it's 5 years worth. And so it's a long process. However, you'll see tax savings within the first 2 to 3 years if you include the investment it took in order to get there, which is not that long for in my opinion, because yeah, you plan on owning that land for a while. It's worth every penny. It should be a no-brainer. Um, so
Great. Yeah,
yeah, and
thank you for that. We've got a couple other questions and then some other potential answers to your honey.
oh yeah, okay. So let's see, which bee species or hybrid are the most docile? That's a great question. So carniolans, I think carniolans are the most docile, but here's a little beekeeping 301. Carniolans are the most docile. However, in the event that the bees supersede a carniolan queen, it's called an F1 or an F2 carniolan. Those tend to be very aggressive. So if you're not managing your colony correctly and those bees go to supersede, if I have a carniolan hive and I see them making a queen cell, I immediately polish off the queen cell and either do one of two things: add a new mated queen of a different species, which Italians are not that aggressive. A lot of people think they are too, but I would say carniolans Italians would be a good start, for a docile hive. Or you can, if you have another, say you have two colonies, one's a carniolan and one is a whatever, another species, Cordovan, Texas 5000, doesn't matter. You can take a frame of eggs and put it into the new colony and they will rear a new queen from that frame of eggs you put in there, and it will be, well, I should say 50% of it will be from the Cordovans. The next 50% depends on the drones that they mate with. The drone seam will obviously dictate what that other half is or what the hybrid is from that. But you won't get that F2 aggressive queen from there. Um, some more answers. A half teaspoon. That's not right. Why do bees make honey? Honey is bees' carbohydrate. Protein. Their protein source is pollen, so they have to have a balance of the two because of that, just to keep themselves going. But a regular worker bee's diet. So for the first 3 days, it's royal jelly, and then once those 3 days have passed, it's actually a mixture of honey, pollen, and a little bit of royal jelly. you can see, and actually, I'm going to zoom back through some of these slides to show you. So that middle picture right there, those are eggs. But if you see the other kind of like goopy looking cells, those are larvae sitting in a puddle of royal jelly. So those are freshly hatched eggs. And in fact, fun fact, if you were to go and try to raise your own queens, you can graft larvae. Those larvae right there are the perfect age to graft new queens from. Anything older than that, you won't get a really vigorous queen. It has to be very, 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 very young larva, and this is a perfect example of that. Let's see some more answers here. 1/8 of a teaspoon. That's closer. Three dashes. I don't I don't know what that means, but 1/10. There we go. 1/12 of a teaspoon. Rosalinda is correct. 1/12 of a teaspoon in her entire lifetime. So to make one jar of a Keeper's Harvest 12-ounce bottle, it takes about 1,000 bees, give or take. So it's quite a bit. Another question: do the bees live slash survive through winter in Central Texas? Yes, they do. You don't really need to insulate your hives, given you have a strong colony going into winter. If you have a strong colony going into winter, they're going to have a lot of honey on the outsides of the box. So like if you look at a hive in nature, as you would call it, it's kind of has this round shape to it. All of the honey is going to be stored on the outsides and the nest is in the middle. So the honey acts as a natural insulator. So if you're going through your colonies pre-winter, getting them ready, and you find a weak colony, you can do one of two things. You can either feed it artificially, which a lot of people think is bad, but it's not. If you feed bees a 1-to-1 sugar syrup, which is 3 gallons of water to 25 pounds of sugar, it's actually the closest thing to emulate natural nectar. Because, like I mentioned before, nectar is 70% water and sucrose. Sucrose is white sugar. You can get 50-pound bags from Costco and mix it with water, and it's the closest thing to nectar, minus all of the natural, I guess, chemical components like carbon and hydrogens and sodiums. Um, and then there's actually a thing called Apis biologics, which is a powder you can put into your syrup that it puts all of those things in there. So all of your carbons and sodiums and hydrogens and things like that. So at that point, you're like one one gene away from actual nectar. So people think feeding bees is bad. It's the opposite. Depending on the time you do it, you don't want to do it in a honey flow, obviously. Um, So, how long does it take for new hives to make honey? I have two hives that I started in March. Italian bees in the hives have been calm and healthy. Awesome. That's good to hear. Um, it depends. So, you had two hives that you started in March. It depends on the size of the colony that you got. So, if you got a nucleus colony, I typically always say you're not going to get honey that first year. What you want to focus on is building those bees up to a full 10 frame Langstroth, or, you know, I don't run top bar hives, so I'm not the best to ask about this, but you want a solid amount of bees going into winter. You want about 6 to 8 frames of bees going into winter with plenty of resources. Um, on that next season, if you've got 4 to 6 frames of bees coming out of winter, you should for sure be able to make at least one box of honey, given you're running a Langstroth setup. Um, if you have Italian bees, she's gonna go straight into rearing brood as soon as the first resource starts coming in, which is typically here in Central Texas. It's Agarita. Uh, it's that it has like a red berry when it's done, but yeah, that's the first pollen source that we tend to get. The next nectar producing plant that I know of that starts is the milkweed, and so those are really really good resources to get bees to start, you know, building up for the honey flow. But I mean, they're just divine little creatures. They know exactly what's going on better than we do. And so if you start seeing pollen getting stored in the frames and a little bit of nectar, I would get ready to get extra space added onto those bees to get them ready for a honey flow because they will start very quickly. But yeah, typically in our area, this is to finally wrap this up. Our honey flow starts in about May. This year was terrible. We got literally, I feel like our year's worth of rain supply in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks in May and June. So that really threw things off for honey flow. But yeah, you really want to be ready for your honey flow starting in about May. Let's see here. Are yellow jackets and wasps in charge of only pollination versus wait, are yellow jackets and wasps in charge of only pollination versus honeybees? I know they're pollinators. I'm not sure I'm quite understanding the question in its entirety, but um, honeybees are. I will say this: native bee species are more efficient pollinators. They're more efficient in the sense of the amount of pollen they're transferring and the certain flowers like makeup. Some bees, native bees, are more efficient in getting into the flower to pollinate. Bees are better pollinators in the sense just by sheer number. I mean, you have 50,000 bees within a colony at any given time. Well, not any given time. At your peak time in the spring, you're going to have anywhere from 30 to 50,000 bees. And so, at that point, they're just by sheer numbers, they're going to be better pollinators. A lot of native bee species are solitary. Some aren't, but they still don't have the population like honeybees do. Next one, royal jelly is sold as health food. Is this correct? And do you collect royal jelly to sell? It is sold as a health food. There isn't, and if you talk to other beekeepers, they'll say the same thing. There is no like hard facts, at least that I've seen, of what royal jelly does. If I'm going through a colony and they has multiple queen cells, I'm gonna probably pop one off and have like a royal jelly shooter. I don't know what it's doing for me, but I've like you, I've heard it's good for you. The way that they harvest royal jelly is really hard on the bees. I would never do it. Um, so I wouldn't consume it as like a vitamin in a sense. They have to get a lot of nurse bees into one colony to raise a boatload of queen cells, and then they prematurely kill the queen cells by pulling the larva out and then just like shooting the royal jelly into essentially a bucket or however they would do it to harvest it. It's really hard on the bees. They work really, really hard to produce that royal jelly to feed the queen larvas. And so, yeah, in short, I don't do that in my own operation. I focus more on honey production and pollen harvesting sometimes. Let's see. It sounds difficult to start and keep a healthy hive. What is the best or very good resource to help those of us that are interested in starting? That's a great question. It, Beekeeping can be very complex, but at the same time, there's like 3 to 5 main boxes you want to check in terms of what you're looking for in your colony. This picture on the left right here is a great representation, and I'll zoom in a little bit on it. So in the middle, obviously we have all of this. That's brood. So that's a huge brood nest. This is a spring colony. It's a great queen. So number one is you want to see what your queen is doing. If she's laying a nest that looks like this, check that box. She's doing great. If it looks what we call shotgun spread, like very, very spotty, this has empty cells, but that's probably freshly hatched bees, or the queen's gonna miss some cells sometimes. There could be pollen in there. There could be anything that for her to like have a reason to miss that cell. But generally, that's a great brood pattern. You want to make sure your queen's doing great. Second, you want to make sure that they have their resources. So around the side, you have a honey band, which is that warbly kind of wax you see on the outside. That's honey. And then with separating the brood from the honey is a pollen band. So you want to see that in your colony. That's a sign of a super healthy colony. They're bringing in enough resources to feed the next generation. They obviously have enough food for themselves to keep moving. That would be the that would be the two very main things I would look for. If you don't have pollen, you can substitute with dry pollens or pollen patties. If you have a pen or want to write this down, there's three very good beekeeping supply companies that I use. One is Pierco. The other one is Man Lake, and that's Man Lake with two N's. And then the third is Dadant. All three of those companies you can get protein supplements, which would be pollen supplements. Um, and then if you see a lack of nectar coming in, just go to Costco, get a 50-pound bag of sugar, and then your ratio to do a 1-to-1 is 3 gallons of water to 25 pounds of sugar. That will make 5 gallons of feed. So you can have inside your hive, you should have a feeder frame that can hold anywhere from 1 to 2 gallons of feed. So one bucket should be able to feed both of your colonies. If you have two, obviously you'll have to do the math if you have more colonies. Um, and then the third, yeah, so like I would say three main boxes to check is making sure you don't have varroa mite in your colonies. There will always be, it sucks to say, but there will always be varroa mites inside your hive. It's at what level they are existing. So any of those beekeeping supply companies I mentioned, you can get varroa check, and it's a little. I wish I had it. I have one, but it's essentially a canister that's got like a barrel inside, and you have to sacrifice some bees, but it's 1 cup of bees off of a brood frame like that, and you scoop them into this cup, and there's alcohol at the bottom, and you twirl the barrel around or the cup for about a minute, and then you will hold it up to the sun, and per 300 bees, which is about a cup of bees, uh, if you have over 3 mites per 300 bees, that's a 1% threshold. If you have over that, you want to do a mite treatment. Um, all those beekeeping supply companies I listed have great treatments. Some are temperature sensitive, so you just have to look into what you're using. I use Apiguard, which is a thymol treatment, and that you can only use when the temperatures don't get above 85 degrees. You you can use it above 85 degrees, but at a half dose. I would just stay simple and do something. If it's, if our temps are below 85, Apiguard all day, I would use that. If they're above that, I would use something like Apivar. Um, there's also formic acid, which is temperature sensitive like Apiguard. But those are the three treatments I would use. And yeah, those are the three main things: making sure that you have a good laying queen, they have resources, and there's a low varroa mite existence within the hive. Let's see. What is a reasonable frequency to check hives? I would say you don't want to check your hives more than once a week. You gotta that it you don't want to stress the hive out and break open the brood nest too often. Um, if you go in and you check those three boxes, seal her up, you're good to go. If you open that hive and all three boxes are checked, but there's a ton of bees, you're definitely going to want to start looking into adding more space because they will swarm on you. Um, so I typically run bees in a deep Langstroth box. Some hives I'll go double deep, but if you run the singles and you see your hive is 80% full, you immediately want to add another box. And you can add medium honey supers at that point because that's eventually what you're going to use to make honey. And invest in a queen excluder because if you want to make honey, you can put the queen excluder over that first box. That way the queen can't go up and start laying eggs and brood in what essentially is going to be what you're going to harvest. So I use them religiously. The queen excluders are lifesavers. You don't have to, but you'll have to do some frame shuffling if she ends up going and laying brood up there, which can just take a long time. And so, yeah, let's see. Have you tried OA vapor? I have. That is something I didn't mention, but that is something I also use in my own operation. I do an oxalic acid vaporization in January and February. Well, I would say, no, let me backtrack. Late December, January, when the colonies are essentially broodless, is when I will go out and do the oxalic vapor um, treatment. Because if there is brood in this picture, like you see, it doesn't penetrate the wax. And so if you have varroa mite on the backs of the bees that are walking around on this frame, it will kill those. But what it's not killing is the varroa mite that's underneath the brood. Formic acid, in my experience, will do that. They're patties. Uh, it also it also will clean up the hive from any like viral loads. So formic acid's a really, really good one. I'm actually getting ready to apply formic acid here in the next couple weeks. We've had a very mild fall, so I'm kind of waiting for the temperatures to drop a little more. But wow, oxalic acid is a very good treatment. So I would stick with that if you're using that. Can you tell us more about what swarming is and does? So swarming, it's the bees. It's in their nature. It's instinct. Just like us, I mean, any animal that is here to reproduce is to continue the bloodline of the species. And so when a colony is becoming too congested, that means it's time to swarm. There's no more room for the queen to lay eggs. All of the honeycombs and frames either have brood in them, they either are filled with pollen, they're filled with nectar. So once she is unable to lay eggs, the colony has gotten too big. So the workers are going to choose, like I said in the beginning, either one or five or 10 or 20 different eggs to start rearing the new queen from. Um, at this point, the old queen will start to shrink, getting ready for her flight. And when that new queen hatches, the old queen and half of the colony leave. And that's the swarm. Half of the colony stays behind. There's some remnants of brood and larvae and things of that sort. But that new virgin queen has to go out and mate 12 to 20 drones and then come back. And because the colony split, it's less congested. So now the new colony can continue to um, thrive and lay more eggs and things of that sort. But if you're a beekeeper, you don't want your colonies to swarm because there's a few things. The virgin queen doesn't always properly mate. She may go out and be eaten by a bird and never come back. She may not mate with 12 to 20 drones. And this is kind of, uh, it's hard to tell sometimes too whether your queen has been mated. You have to give her, a month and a half. But a queen can come back, start laying eggs like crazy, and then all of a sudden you go back in 30 days and they're rearing a new queen. Well, she didn't properly get mated. So you have, a few things to look out for with that. But yeah, that's their instinct. They're just naturally there to divide, and yeah, that's that. So, do we have any other questions here? What are the chances that you'll attract African killer bees? Have you seen any? I have seen killer bees or Africanized bees. Africanized bees are it's actually an African honeybee. They're just a very aggressive species or genetic of honeybee. So like we run European honeybees, which you have all of your different um, genetics, like we talked about. And the African honeybee, not that the African honeybee is still, it's going to sound crazy. The African honeybee is still European honeybee, Apis mellifera. However, it's the genetic that causes them to be so aggressive. If you are open mating, so like say you have bees and you're like, hey, I want to make a split before my bees swarm. So you can also do that. You can take frames of brood and resources, add them into a new box, which will decongest your hive and prevent swarming. So that's a way to prevent swarming. But by doing that, you have to have a queen. So if you go to make a split, you can make what's called a walkaway split. You have to have a lot of nurse bees in there, and then you have to have frames of eggs and larvae. So if you do that, what you're banking on is that those bees are going to raise a new queen. She's going to come out, hatch, go on a mating flight,
or two or three successfully get mated, come back, and now you have a fully functioning hive. You run the risk, depending on what location you're in. It's good to know where you're at and talk to other beekeepers in your area to make sure that they don't have any Africanized hives or aggressive hives or things of that sort. Or if you're in really rural areas and you've seen a lot of honeybees, there's a chance you've got an Africanized hive, cooped up in an oak tree somewhere, and it's in bees' instincts, especially with drones. When there's a virgin queen flying around, I mean, they know the pheromones out, so you run the risk of your virgin queen mating with Africanized drones. So if the queen comes back, like say you make the split and it's really gentile and docile, and then the queen comes back and you're like, okay, bam, there she is, and then you go back like 2 weeks later and it's a very, very aggressive hive, chances are the queen mated with an Africanized drone. I don't like running aggressive bees, so I would pinch the queen. And there's a lot of queen breeders in Texas that you can buy mated queens from. That's the safest play. They specifically are beekeepers for raising queens to sell to beekeepers like us. So that's what I would do. We have one more question. What would you do if you have a hive trying to raise a queen at this time of year? Yeah, that's a great question. Depends on what you're looking at. So if you open your hive and it's very congested, they're trying to swarm. Bees will swarm at any time of year if they're just too congested. So you don't want to make splits in general at this time of year because you're going into winter. It's going to be 80 degrees out today. Like if you can make a split, if you watch the weather, and there's an adequate amount of drones within your apiary, um, you can. I've done it, but it's just you really got to pay attention to what you're reading in your hive. What is your hive telling you? Is there a lot of bees to where okay, I can make a split and have these two colonies now get through winter? If they're like I said, too congested and they're wanting to swarm, you can just continually kill your queen cells until they stop. But in my experience, that's a lot of work. You got to go check your colonies every week and a half and kill the queen cells until they just give up and uh, there's finally no more resources coming in. I see some pollen still coming in our hives, so there's that. The only other thing I could think of is that they're superseding, which is the queen is either getting old or infertile. It's just a really not ideal time for you to be seeing queen cells in your hive, especially if it's a supersedure. One way you can tell, and it's not like 100% accurate, but a supersedure cell will be more in the middle of the frame. Swarm cells tend to be at the bottom of that bar on the frame right there. So wherever you're seeing the queen cell, can I would say to be safe about 50-60% of the time tell you what's going on. Um, Mind you, they will make swarm cells in the middle of the frames also. So it's not a telltale, but at this time of year, it's a better way of determining what they're doing, whether they're trying to swarm or trying to supersede. Like I said, if the bees are boiling out of the entrance right now and you see queen cells, they're probably trying to swarm. Um, so you said they have a queen cell and not enough drones at this time of year. Yeah. Um, so if they have a queen cell, I just you got to go back in and see what the size of the colony is. If they're large, they're probably trying to swarm, and so I would just try to kill off the queen cells or pinch the queen cells each time you see them come up until they just stop. If you did what I just said in the springtime, it's never going to happen. They will eventually swarm. Just you have to split them before they get into that swarming instinct. If you're going through your hives in the spring and they are wanting to swarm, you have got to bust them down to essentially nothing in order for them to revert their swarming instinct. So, like if I have a 10 frame colony that I'm looking at and they're wanting to swarm, I'm going to bust that colony down to literally 2 frames of bees with the queen and maybe a frame of honey and a frame of pollen. Because at that point, you've literally removed 90% of the colony, and then they'll kind of revert on their swarming instincts. But I've also seen it not even make a difference. Once they get to that point, it's really hard to come back from it. However, like I said, you can bust them down to virtually nothing and you can revert that. I have seen that before as well. Oh, wow. Okay. So I think that's it for questions. There's a lot going on with beekeeping. It's pretty intense, pretty wild, but at the same time, it's very fun. It's very rewarding. If you have 1 to 2 hives, it's very manageable. And I'm more than willing to help. You can go to my website. It's keepersharvest.com, and we have just like a general submission form. If you throw a question in there, I'm happy to get back to you with any answers. But also, our Instagram has really, really, really cool, informative stuff on there as well. So
Thanks, Dylan. That was fun. That was
yeah,
great. I think you answered a lot of folks' questions, and everybody's going home with some good takeaways from today. We appreciate
yeah,
having you on. I appreciate you taking the time and of course, being a strong supporter of, TWA and all of your time you volunteered over the past
yes,
year. So we
yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank all of you for being here today. Um, we will post this webinar on our YouTube page here shortly. Before we go, I'd like to go ahead and just put a plug in for our next Wild at Work in December. We'll have a duck migration outlook with Todd Marandino with Ducks Unlimited on December 17th. So join us next month for Wild at Work, and we hope everybody has a great rest of their day, great afternoon. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, guys.